open.
More COVID-19 cases have more Long Island schools going remote, closing their doors after the Thanksgiving holiday break to take a pause, all to curb the spread of the coronavirus.
I'm very concerned and very scared for what's going on.
COVID infection rates edging up in some Long Island communities, putting them on the verge of becoming red zone microclusters.
It's going to be devastating to the community and our school district.
That would force schools to operate remote only.
It's a little nervous because I don't want to be positive.
Students and staff in some schools getting emergency COVID tests as infection rates in their town spike, and now the looming possibility of mandatory COVID testing for students in schools.
I think it's hardest for my 7-year-old.
All of it taking its toll on the mental health of students, teachers, and parents, caught in a new normal that is anything but. Good evening and thank you for watching State of Our Schools, our special series on education in the age of COVID-19. Let's get right to today's top stories in our schools. A coronavirus testing alert. Nassau's county executive today announcing a new plan for testing in schools located in hotspots. Laura Curran also says the county is working with the state to get more rapid testing kits to allocate to school districts and is ramping up testing sites. Meantime, the head of the CDC today says schools are not a major source of coronavirus transmission. Dr. Robert Redfield is once again advocating for in-person learning. Tonight, mandatory coronavirus testing of students in COVID cluster zones. We'll take a look at the challenges and the controversy there, plus several Long Island school districts keeping their doors closed for the week, concerned about a spike in COVID-19 cases following the Thanksgiving break. Will it help curb COVID in our schools? And from school closures to remote learning to feelings of isolation, we'll take a look at the toll the pandemic is taking on the mental health of our kids, parents, and teachers. Tonight we have some special guests who will share their thoughts on all of these topics. Plainview Old Bethpage School Superintendent Dr. Mary O'Mara and DrLiz Matheis, a licensed clinical psychologist and certified school psychologist. Thank you both for being here.
Of course.
We also want to hear from you, our viewers on Facebook. We are streaming live on the News 12 Long Island Facebook page. Share your comments and questions, and we may even share them right here on the air. All right, let's begin with the shift in coronavirus testing in our schools. Nassau's county executive today announcing the testing requirements have changed for schools in yellow, orange, and red zones.
In a yellow zone, it's 20% of the population has to be tested just once now, and then they can maintain that. They don't have to keep testing unless they go into an orange zone. Orange zone is 20% of the population must be tested once a month, and red zone 30%.
So what does it mean right now? Well, Massapequa and Great Neck remain in the yellow zone at the moment. No towns or cities in Nassau are in the orange or red zones at this point. In Suffolk, the county has been conducting in-school testing in the hot zones of Riverhead and Hampton Bays, hoping to avoid being forced into fully remote learning. It's a controversial topic. Do we allow our kids to receive mandatory COVID tests in schools? And how exactly will that be handled? Or do we get the tests on our own? Let's begin with Dr. Matheis. We're talking about the impact that this has on children. Difficult decision for parents to make. What do you recommend?
In terms of having the testing done on a mandatory basis?
Well, how about in terms of having it done in school as opposed to maybe the parent opts out and says, I'll get it done on my own and I'll submit the results?
I think as a school, I understand as a school, you want to make sure that your students are not carrying the virus. And it's a tough one because you want to give parents the option to make that decision. But at the same time, you want to keep the majority of the students safe. So it's a tough decision, and it's also, not a very comfortable test to have, and some kids are going to be uncomfortable, and it may create even some anxiety about kids going to school and possibly getting the COVID test. So it's a no-win situation if you really think about it.
It's a conversation parents certainly have to have with their kids one way or another. Dr. O'Mara, I want to ask you, are districts prepared to handle this? This is not the typical thing you would expect from schools to have to carry out testing.
I'm sure if you speak with most of my colleagues across Long Island, you'll see that more and more is being asked of the schools. And unfortunately, because we do whatever is requested well, because we know it is so important to have our children in school, we see it every day, how well they're doing, how they're responding to being back with their friends and with their teachers. But I have to tell you, this really is something that would be a tremendous effort. And I know most of the districts are preparing to do this, knowing it's not going away. And ultimately, we want to know that the children in our school are healthy, our staff is healthy, and we can respond more quickly if we are managing it within the school. But again, it's another task put upon us with not extra funding to do this.
So, Dr. O'Mara, to follow up, how would you carry this out? Are these tests administered on scene at the school? Who administers the tests? Do the students have to go off campus? So many questions here.
Sure, and we've been given great latitude. A lot of districts are looking to become their own limited service laboratories, partnering with our local medical affiliates, and we can do them in-house with our own trained staff. Some people are bringing outside organizations in, and South Nassau Hospital has been a great partner to some neighboring districts with Mount Sinai and having off-site so that they can drive up and get that done. Right here in Plainview, Old Bethpage, we're preparing for our nurses to be able to administer it, knowing that it is an adult with whom our students are familiar. The parents can come and with their children to have it done, and parents also would have the option to take their children to their own healthcare provider to have the test if we were mandated to test 20% of our population, which would be about 1,200 people. That's a big task over 10 days while you're trying to educate at the same time and maintain all the other requirements that have been put upon us to keep schools open.
We're starting to see some comments come in from our Facebook page. Stacy Marie says, no mandatory COVID tests in school, but Michelle says, yes, absolutely. If you want to keep the schools open, you have to maintain safety for students and teachers and staff. Dr. Liz, obviously it is safety first, but long term, do you think this could have, I don't want to overstate it, but could it have a traumatizing effect on kids who certainly didn't expect to be getting COVID tests in school, a year or two ago?
Absolutely. I think for a lot of young children who are struggling to go to school because it's so different already, now putting the maybe the unexpected COVID test on top of that is, first of all, it's taking them out of the classroom, and taking away from their time for education, but it's also, as I said, it's uncomfortable. We all know it's uncomfortable, but then to not know when it may happen, or even if there are set dates where it would happen, there are a lot of kids who are going to be afraid to come in because they don't want to have it done. And so it's mixing, the educational component with the medical component, which I understand. Again, I can understand it on the intellectual level, but thinking about it from like my own 7-year-old's perspective, I can see him really having a hard time on the days where it's time to go in and have the test, or asking me again and again, is it today the day? Is today the day? And we already have so many kids who are so very anxious. This would it would add to it. So again, it's a tough question with no real right answer.
It's uncharted territory in so many ways for so many of us. Let's change topics now. Some schools staying closed a bit longer after the Thanksgiving break, citing COVID concerns. Hauppauge, Wyandanch, South Country, Central Islip, Hempstead, Westbury, and Nassau-Bosse systems among those closing buildings for the week to go remote. Dr. O'Mara, Plainview Old Bethpage, not on that list. Tell us about the factors that you weighed here in coming to that decision.
Sure. Fortunately, we have a very clear message from our community that they want the children in schools as often as possible, and we know that's the best for them. We were very careful with our protocols. We have seen an uptick, as the entire Nassau County and Suffolk County have seen, but we know that our protocols in school are not the cause for transmission. We can't control when it comes into our building, but we can absolutely reduce the exposure. And having the children in school it's 7 hours of the day that we know they're not going to be out contracting it somewhere else. So we were pretty committed to keeping it open. But I have to tell you, with the amount of contact tracing that has to go on with each case and with this uptick, it really is most of what all of our administrators do throughout the day now.
It's very interesting to see how the job title has changed and the role has changed here in this COVID era. Dr. Liz, what kind of impact does it have on a student and teachers as well, quite frankly, to go from maybe in-person to remote, back to in-person if they're lucky? This is not what we're used to. Again, we're not used to a lot of things during the COVID era, but you'd like to have some consistency, right?
It takes all the consistency away. As I've had the experience of a Saturday night where we were told the schools are going to be closed for 2 weeks for my son who's in the high school. It's very inconsistent, and my children are constantly asking me, are we going to school today? Are we home? And for what duration? And it's very confusing for a lot of the children that I work with in my practice as well, as they really don't know if they're coming or they're going, and it's very disorienting. And we all just want consistency. School has always been the place where you have the most structure and the most consistency, and it's a place where some children who are anxious thrive because they know what's coming. And right now, none of us know what's coming.
Stacy May writing on our News 12 Long Island Facebook page, if you want your kids in school full time, stop being selfish, wear your masks and social distance already. Those mitigation efforts, officials say, go quite a long way. Dr. O'Mara, quickly here, are you finding that students have, by and large, been able to stick to those guidelines and follow through?
Absolutely. In our schools, they have been absolutely fantastic. Where the real challenge is outside the school day and the weekend events. That really will be the things that shut down schools.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. You do all this Monday through Friday, but you don't know, the teachers don't know, the staff doesn't know what's going on the weekend. And by the way, the parents don't know what's going on with the teachers and the staff. So a lot of variables here as we continue to move through this era. Well, we have a lot more to talk about. Still ahead on our special series, State of Our Schools, the emotional toll. We touched on it, right? But there is an emotional toll COVID-19 is taking on the mental health of our children. Let's talk more about that when we come back. Okay, and we continue now on Facebook Live for those watching on the News 12 Long Island Facebook page. Thank you all for being here. And let's talk about some of the comments we're seeing here. So there's some reaction now to the conversation we just had. We have Todd who says, I think kids should get tested at school. And then Shari right after says, never ever will my children be allowed to be tested without a parent present. Talk about the end of parental rights. That is from Shari there. Dr. O'Mara, is this something where, a nurse, a medical professional now is kind of in an awkward position here between the parent, what has to be done at the state level? If you're in one of these zones, it's not easy.
No, it's definitely not easy, and you can completely understand these parents' concerns that are writing in. As a mother of 5, I would never want anything done to my children without me being there. So I know all of my colleagues on Long Island will be extremely sensitive to that, and we are preparing for how we accommodate a parent who wants to accompany a child, but also having the ability to have their own pediatrician administer the test.
Dr. Liz, we have a comment from Carmita who says, I don't agree with the mandatory test. They must have to close all the schools. So that person there taking it to the extreme saying, listen, if we got to get to the point of mandatory tests in schools, let's just close the schools. What do you think about that?
I don't think that closing the schools is the best idea. I think children need to be in school, and they need to be in school as much as possible. And I know everyone is working very hard to make that happen. So and there's got to be a middle ground. Taking the kids out of school in order to avoid the mandatory testing doesn't sound like the best option, because we do want to keep our kids in school.
Brian Harrison writes, I agree. We teachers, so he's a teacher, are keeping masks on all day long and enforcing the students to do the same. People need to do the same outside and with their families and their friends as well. So when you think about teacher health, administrator health, Dr. O'Mara, that's got to come into play, right? The idea that, listen, it's not just about your kids. There are people in that building working.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I appreciate the teacher's comment, because that really is the hardest thing. Teachers really are the bigger people at risk here when others are being irresponsible, and they're coming to do what they do for their living, and they really care about these kids. And that really weighs on their mental stress, and a lot of us are very concerned. It is only December 2nd. It's a long way to June, and to have people constantly working under that worry and fear is really not very healthy at all. So I appreciate that comment from Mr. Harris.
Yeah, and certainly, want to commend the teachers out there who are doing this day in, day out, keeping themselves safe, keeping the students safe, and at the same time, trying to provide that consistency, Dr. Liz, you spoke about, that normalcy as well. Okay, let's stop right here. We're going to come back on the other side of this break now on News 12.
Isolating children from teachers and friends is not good for their mental health. It's not good for their educational development. It's not good for their social and emotional development.
Welcome back to News 12 special series on the state of our schools. The COVID-19 crisis has taken a psychological toll on people of all ages, but our kids, of course, especially being hard hit by this. The pandemic has left students isolated from their friends, their classmates in some cases, extracurricular activities, putting them at higher risk of developing anxiety and depression. Dr. Mary O'Mara and Dr. Liz Matheis are back with us now. Dr. Matheis, you're the expert on this. Are you seeing a lot of examples of children, parents reporting that kind of anxiety and potentially depression that may come along with their current circumstances?
Absolutely. It's really overwhelming how sad our teens are for not having the ability to see their friends regularly and to have the regular interactions and participation in events that should be happening during the school year. I had a chance to speak to a group of junior students at a local, our technical school, and they said they were very thankful that it wasn't their freshman year and it wasn't their senior year, but they were just so saddened by the fact that they're not having just all the regular social interactions and building the friendships and making memories and having experiences. And the level of anxiety is so high with kids who are really torn between wanting to go to school and not wanting to, but wanting to stay home because they don't want to contract the virus or bring the virus home to parents, or feeling a very big responsibility about keeping grandparents healthy and safe. And so it's overwhelming, the amount of sadness and anxiety and just grief that a lot of our children, adolescents, young adults, and parents are feeling for their own children and their own experience of stress of having parents having to work and also be present in the home and to help their children through their coursework. It's an overwhelming time for all of us.
You think about some of the students who are working virtually, the dining room table, you could have 3, 4, 5 laptops around the table. What do you recommend now for kids, for young adults, even for the teachers as well, to kind of cope with all of this?
So a lot of things that I've been saying to a lot of the teens who are just feeling so overwhelmed, they're like, I'm so tired. Part of it is they're sad, but part of it is they're sitting. They're just sitting for long periods of time, whereas they would go to the bus and walk through the building and have their PE class and walk through the halls and then get out of school and onto the bus or walk home. That level of physical activity is now diminished. And so a lot of what I say to a lot of the teens and parents and children that I work with is you have to move and you have to build in that time to do something. Go for a bike ride, go for a walk. I know it's cold, if you have a treadmill, whatever it is, we just have to keep moving because it's just not normal for us to sit and have 4 or 5 laptops and be constantly typing all day.
Dr. O'Mara, how do you combat that even in a classroom setting? I mean, no, in many districts now, the students have to basically stay in place, right? They don't move to a different classroom for a special outdoor activities, a far different gym, etc.
Yeah, well, this is where our teachers are the unsung heroes in this whole COVID crisis. They have been amazingly creative. Our physical education teachers, our music teachers, art teachers in particular, they're coming in, providing that relief, getting up, doing mindful breaks. They're doing a couple of minutes of dance and moving around and play safely. When we bring the students outside, they're able to move around. But, It's really true. They're sitting, the remote learners, they're home, they're in front of that computer all day long, and then they have homework at night at the high school level. But I have to tell you, the classroom teachers have found many ways to get the students up and moving safely throughout the day, but nothing replaces what it used to be. And again, how sustainable is this over the long term?
Dr. O'Mara, I don't mean to put another responsibility on the plate of administrators across the county here, across both counties, the island, the country, but what do you do to monitor the mental health of your staff, the teachers, the staffers who are working in the building day in, day out?
You know, the doctor here talked about the self-care. It's critically important, and the hardest thing and the biggest concern is burnout with our administrative team, because it is nonstop. Even through Thanksgiving, they were taking phone calls of positive cases, and you can't just turn your phone off, because you know if you go back and the student was in school on Tuesday before Thanksgiving, you have phone calls to make sure anybody who was a close contact is notified and begins their quarantine in the absence of any other person that can do that. And it's easy to tell an administrator to shut off and unplug, but they know this is a deadly virus, and if they have information about it, they can't just turn off their phone and go to sleep. So burnout is a real concern.
Cell phone keeps ringing, and those Zoom meetings do seem to find everyone during this COVID era, don't they? Joe writes on our Facebook page, I tell my students every day, if it's a nice day, to go out after school, get some exercise, and enjoy. A mental break, Dr. Liz, that's a big deal, right?
Huge, huge. I can't emphasize the self-care need right now for everybody, parents, teachers, administrators. Nobody has an easy job right now. Finding whatever outlet and then varying it, whether it's yoga, meditation, walking, biking, whatever it is, do it and do it consistently, because that moment of just disconnecting from the computer and from the text, because we're now our eyeballs are engrossed in the electronics, whereas before it was something we used a little bit, to get an assignment in, and it was a novelty, and now it's in our face all day long.
Yeah, you think of the traditional parent who maybe tells their kid, get off, enough with the video games already. Now it's get off the video games and get back to the laptop and do your homework there. It's quite a time we're living in. All right, stay right there. Moving forward, we're beginning the third month of the school year. June, a long way away, and our students have already been through so much. A vaccine coming, but what will it take to get that in our classrooms? What kind of impact could that have? When will it happen? Again, so many questions, so many uncertainties. We'll look at some of that when we return here on State of Our Schools, a News 12 special. We'll be right back. Facebook page. You know, we had a comment earlier from Trudy Hoffman. She said mental health of the parents, also we addressed that. She says, and grandparents too. And Dr. Liz, you mentioned that earlier, and I know we've all seen grandparents now out there picking up kids, and they basically have to try to maneuver this situation with kid gloves. It's not easy. What do you say about grandparents and their own mental health?
Well, my parents just moved closer to me, so I'm eternally grateful in the last month, and I am engaging them because they are lonely. And we really have to think about the grandparents who I know we're all trying to protect, but keeping them isolated is also it's not healthy for them. So as much as, I worry about them, I also know that it does them more harm, because in the beginning of it all, we didn't see them for many, many months. And I didn't realize how hard it was on my own children, that when they saw their grandparents, they were just so happy and almost sad that they hadn't seen each other for such a long time. But, as long as you keep them in your bubble and you use the safety precautions to keep everybody healthy, then keep them in your bubble, because it really serves everyone.
It must be strange for kids nowadays to, even if they're seeing their grandparents, but maybe they see them at a distance outside, as to not put them in harm's way. It has to be very different. Certainly not something we grew up with. Dr. O'Mara, I do want to ask you, when you see grandparents picking up children, and even for some of your older staffers, some of the people who have been there 30 years plus, who look, I mean, if you go by the age and you go by the demographics, they could potentially be higher risk. What goes through your mind when you consider what they could potentially be putting on the line here?
I tell you, it's a great responsibility, and you can never really guarantee people you are 100% safe because it's just so easy to contract this virus. And the saddest thing was many older people that worked for us made decisions to retire prematurely because they just knew, I just can't put myself at risk, not for the age, but probably other factors. But to know people decided to end their career prematurely because of their fear of catching this virus, that's sad.
It is. It is. Okay, we're going to leave it right there. We're going to come back on the other side of this. It's just a 2-minute section, though. So I'll ask you each a question, and you'll give me a quick response, and then that's kind of the end of it. So stay right there. Thank you. Welcome back to News 12 Special Series, The State of Our Schools. Let's get some final thoughts now from our guests. Dr. O'Mara, I want to start with you. We talked about the preparation that needs to be done here in terms of testing, but we're hearing a lot about vaccines. Is that something that's even on the radar for local school districts right now?
No, not at all. And it's only seen as there could be potentially an end to this in sight, and at least there's some sort of a goal, but no talk of us being the ones to administer that.
Something to watch there. Dr. Liz, lastly, the talk of the vaccine, that represents hope. That's a good thing, right?
I know it's making me hopeful. It's making me feel that maybe there is going to be an end in sight close, sooner than later. And, take the hope where you can get it.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, Dr. O'Mara, Dr. Liz, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time. We wish you all the best as we all continue to navigate this. Hopefully, Dr. O'Mara, at some point, maybe you can turn the cell phone off for just a couple of minutes, get a little rest.
June is coming. June,
That's right.
correct?
That's right. We got to look forward to that. The light at the end of the tunnel for so many potential reasons. But thank you again for being
Thank
here.
you.
That is the state of our schools today. I'd like to thank our guests once again for taking part in tonight's program. I'd also like to thank the many folks at home who have watched this show, have shared their comments and questions as well on the News 12 Long Island Facebook page. I'm Rich Barabbi. Thanks for watching and have a great night.